If you enjoy the following clip from my podcast, please like, subscribe, and head over to the full episode of The Backseat Fighter, the most honest, most thoughtful, and certainly the best MMA podcast in the game. My name's Charles Binns. Thank you for watching.
So let's get into the fights at UFC 309 that took place at the Mecca, Madison Square Garden this weekend in New York City. Wow, what an event. The fights delivered from the early prelims all the way to the top of the main card in the main event. But we've got to start at the fight or on the fight between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. I mean, these were two greats of the game that battled it out in the main event here. Jon Jones coming out on top with the third round knockout of Stipe Miocic. I mean, it was a beautiful vintage performance by Jon Jones. A spinning back kick to the ribs that puts Stipe Miocic down. And of course, Jon Jones follows it up with his patented deadly ground and pound with the elbows, and the ref with Stipe already out, basically, in terms of already out and down with that body kick damage that hit the ribs, jumps in very quickly, and Jon Jones gets up, celebrates, does the Donald Trump dance to Donald Trump on the cage side, and Jon Jones, the inevitable man he is, wins again, and another huge name on his resume. His legacy is unrivaled in this sport, it has to be said. 17 straight title fights and another victory to his name in a defense, his first defense of his heavyweight championship. But let's get into the fight and what I thought about when I was watching it. I thought Jon Jones looked spectacular, not just in terms of the performance, which we'll get into, but physically, he just came in looking a lot leaner than his heavyweight debut against Cyril Gane. He had his abs there, and he looked more like the light heavyweight GOAT version of Jon Jones that we have seen in past years. But it became very obvious very quickly as soon as the exchanges started to happen that Jon Jones was dominating the range, as he always does. Those extremely long limbs that he has, the way he uses his fingertips and puts it in the eyes of his opponent when they advanced towards him. He was controlling range perfectly, throwing those obliques to the front knee of Stipe, and those body shots were just absolutely beautiful. He was just a step ahead of Stipe in this fight. I think, he showed that he's just a level above in terms of his arsenal, which we spoke about in my predictions, in terms of just the fact that Jon Jones has unlimited tools in his arsenal, and he's going to go to those whenever he sees openings. The first big event or big example of that I saw in the fight was his ability to just trip Stipe. He kind of throws out a lead kick to that front leg of Stipe Miocic, actually steps past him, gets his arm around Stipe's neck and shoulders and body and torso, and just throws him over his own leg onto the ground and lands, I think, inside control. It's just an amazing ability by Jon Jones to control the pace of the fight, and even on the feet, he landed such good shots with the hands. I know people like to think that Jon Jones doesn't have that much power, and he's not gonna put you out cold like Alex Pereira with the hands, but he does have great shot selection, great thudding shots. And I think at one point, in the fight, he lands a right hand that completely stuns Stipe. He starts blinking his eye, and it definitely did some damage. But the way he finished that fight was vintage Jon Jones, vintage creativity, vintage destruction with that creativity as well. And I implore anybody to go and look at that finish. And Jon Jones is still a pound for pound number one, number two, number three, wherever you want to put him. I'm not going to do that debate right now. That will be for Thursday, I imagine. But an absolute vintage performance. And I think all credit goes to Jon. It's not just the fact that, and we'll get into it, of how Stipe looked, but Jon imposed his will in this fight and just looked steps and miles ahead of Stipe Miocic. And, now that fight between him and Tom Aspinall becomes even more necessary for both the fans, the UFC as an organization, the media, but I think more than anything for Jon Jones, because I think when it comes to legacy, which he's been talking about for months now, that he's only fighting for his legacy at this point and he doesn't need to fight anymore, which he absolutely does not. He has nothing left to prove as a fighter. But at heavyweight, if he, truly wants to go down as Jon Jones can go down as the greatest heavyweight of all time, if he beats Tom Aspinall. And I think Tom Aspinall still has a great chance against Jon Jones, even though Jon Jones looked so great in that fight. But Stipe Miocic, we have to talk about Stipe here. You know, if you would ask me, and I said this in my predictions, that if you would ask me about when this fight got rebooked, even when it was booked the first time, but especially when it got rebooked for this past November the 16th in Madison Square Garden, I would have told you that it's a ridiculous fight, that Stipe shouldn't really be getting a shot at the title after 4 years or almost 4 years of inactivity and coming off a devastating knockout loss to Francis Ngannou. But over the course of the fight week, I was kind of convinced that, you know what, Stipe is the greatest of all time at heavyweight. I thought that he looked really, really good. I thought physically he looked in shape. I thought he looked, even better than he had done in some of his previous fights, just physically. And, he looked motivated. And I really believe that it was going to be much more of a competitive fight than it turned out to be. And that's obviously credit to Jon Jones. But it is also credit to what many worried about in the build up to this fight, which was Stipe Miocic's age, the damage he's taken, and, ring rust is real, and I think we saw it in the co-main event, which we'll get into as well. Ring rust is real. You can't just spend 4 years or close to 4 years outside of the octagon, not under the bright lights, and then expect to come in and beat Jon Jones. But to be fair, with the greatness of Stipe Miocic, I as well believe that he could not necessarily turn back time, because I don't think it's one of those things. Not that's a Mike Tyson thing we saw, which was a ridiculous event between him and Jake Paul, I must say. But I think Stipe looked very, very slow. I think he looked sluggish, hesitant, and, just unable to get into any sort of rhythm. And a lot of that is Jon Jones, but a lot of that I do believe is just a process or a consequence of time, father time. And I think it was definitely the good, moral, correct, and wholesome choice for Stipe Miocic to retire in the cage straight after. And in classic Stipe Miocic fashion, he didn't say much. He said, "I'm done, thank God." And, he exited the octagon. Stipe Miocic, what an amazing career. I need to talk about that. I went over in my predictions, the amount of the rampage he went on in terms of knocking out the best heavyweights on the planet. And, he held the belt, 2 different times in heavyweight, 4 defenses of the title, the most in UFC history. His legacy is cemented. This fight for Stipe, it doesn't necessarily take away from his legacy. And, that's an interesting point. I don't think it definitely adds something to Jon's legacy, because he defended the heavyweight belt. I mean, that's in itself is a huge thing. And to be doing it 16 years into his career, still at the top of the game, you can't deny that Jon Jones has a case for the greatest of all time, or is the consensus greatest of all time. The only caveat is that Stipe Miocic wasn't necessarily the rightful contender. And I don't want to say that, especially as, again, my whole podcast is about humility and honesty and understanding that I myself am not a fighter. So, I can never do what Stipe Miocic has done in the ring, in the octagon. And I would never, I'm not saying anything bad about Stipe. I just believe that Tom Aspinall is a generational heavyweight. The things we've seen him do to people, even like Marcin Tybura, who was on the card, right? What Tom Aspinall did to him and what he did to Jonathan Deniz. I mean, you'll see the levels that Tom Aspinall is on, right? Tom Aspinall is an extremely big, an extremely fast and explosive, intelligent, well-rounded heavyweight who offers the biggest threat to Jon Jones I can remember. And that's not to discredit all the legends that Jon Jones has taken out in his career, the elite resume that he has. But I just believe that at this point in Jon's career and at this point in Tom Aspinall's career, that's the fight we need. That's the fight the sport needs. And for Jon's legacy, that will do wonders. But to wrap up my reaction, I just believe that Jon Jones was on another level. And Jon Jones showed who he is, that he's the greatest of all time. And he just showed an immense ability to not only to dodge punches of Stipe. He was too fast for Stipe. He was too vicious for Stipe. He was too intelligent with the sweeps, with the clinch, the knees to the body, like I said he would do in my predictions. And, just an all-round elite performance, complete domination by Jon Jones. But, great fight. And I hope now we get the rightful fight next with Tom Aspinall.